right. Hi, Jamie. Thanks for joining me today. How are you?
Good, Lauren. How are you?
Good. All right. We're talking about migrating legacy attachments into OnBase and Cityworks PLL today for the Cityworks conference. So thanks for joining me. And I think we're going to do a little QA style for this session. So we'll do some introductions. Jamie and I will go over our roles, and we'll talk a little bit about the project that we got to work on together. And then, we'll go through and chat with Jamie a little bit about his experience migrating documents from from the city's legacy permitting system into Cityworks PLL and OnBase document management. All right, here we go. So Jamie, I think we're gonna have you go first if I can advance the slide. There we go. All right.
All right. Yes. Jamie Eubanks. I'm Deputy Director of Information Systems for the City of Escondido. Our city was established in 1888. We're a full-service city. We have police services, fire, paramedic. We have a water treatment plant. We have a wastewater treatment plant. We even have a couple of lakes in the city. We're just north of the city of San Diego with a population of approximately 150,000. We've been on Cityworks AMS since 2001 and Cityworks PLL since 2019.
All right. So myself, I'm Lauren Sullivan. I'm a project manager with Timmons Group. Timmons Group is a award-winning Esri business partner and Cityworks Platinum business partner. We've been doing Cityworks implementations for a very long time with 22 people in our Cityworks practice at Timmons Group. We do some strategic development with Cityworks, and in my role particularly, I focus on Cityworks implementations in the West region. And I've been doing work with Cityworks and working just kind of the community development sector in general for about 7 years now. So we're going to talk a little bit about a project that Timmons Group undertook with the city of Escondido, basically to migrate Escondido off of their existing permitting system, including all their permitting data in that legacy system, and their documents. So Jamie, do you want to tell us a little bit about the existing system you're migrating from?
Sure. We've been on the system called TRAKiT for quite a few years. I think it was at least 15 years probably before we decided that we were on an older version of it, and the company had been bought and sold a couple of times, and we had to decide, where do we move on from here? So we evaluated the newest version of TRAKiT, and then we also compared it to Cityworks PLL because we'd had Cityworks AMS for quite some time, and we were happy with that. And Cityworks PLL, of course, won out with the GIS-centric model and everything. So from that point, we determined we knew we wanted to go to electronic plan review. All of our plans had been done on paper reviews up to that point. And we talked with Cityworks about that, and OnBase was their premium partner for that, for plan reviews. And so we went with that. And then we came across Timmons Group as implementation partner and found out about the Timmons Group PLL portal, which kind of was perfect for us because it tied together the customer experience on the other side so that they could interface in with Cityworks and with OnBase, and we could do more remote applications that way.
Right, so customers can apply for their permits and licenses online through the Timmons Group portal, and that then deposits our permits or our licenses into Cityworks and our documents into OnBase, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Perfect. So I'm wondering, did digital documents then play a role in your decision to choose Cityworks for a new permitting system?
I don't think it was the digital documents themselves, but we definitely we knew that we had a need to get these digital documents into Cityworks. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I guess the thought was we were kind of going to replicate what TRAKiT had. So in TRAKiT, the file attachments, right, which so that the associated with each case within the system, you can have one or more files that are there. Mm-hmm. And we knew that the Cityworks had that same capability. But then OnBase gave us the extra advantage of having an actual document management system that we could upload into, and that would give us a lot more capabilities for management of the documents going forward.
Right. Most cities have some paper documents. when they're looking to move from a legacy system, a permitting system into Cityworks, for example. So I'm assuming Escondido, you didn't have everything digital at that point, right? In the legacy system as well, you had some paper?
Right. Yes, they had. We still do actually. There's some documents that are kind of born on paper, and they'll scan them in sometimes and use them as attachments. But a lot of times they'll stay paper, and they'll be filed away, and then city clerk's office will handle that. The scanning of them for permanent records.
Okay.
And so our long-term goal really is to migrate from our legacy document management system into OnBase, and then unify on that. That's still a work in progress.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, it sounds like it's all coming together.
It is.
All right. Well, I'm glad we could be the start of it. So let me give a little bit of an overview, since we are talking about this project, of kind of the timeline of how Timmons Group and the city were working together to, bring the data from the TRAKiT system into Cityworks, which was, a primary role that Timmons Group played in the effort to migrate that data from TRAKiT into the new system, and implement the portal alongside that. So I think we started now in September of 2018. We had a kickoff, and the idea behind this project was to do essentially like a phased implementation. So we had these kind of phase one, what we call phase 1.5 and phase 2. So we'll get into that. So phase 1 was business license. We decided to start with business license because they would be using the Timmons Group portal to accept new licenses online and to renew existing licensing for business license for the city. But those users wouldn't be using the OnBase plan review product, which is something that we knew planners later on in community development would be using. And we would have a migration of documentation from from TRAKiT essentially into OnBase, but no plan review was required. So that phase essentially completed around January of 2019. And then the city actually undertook kind of what we call phase 1.5 of code enforcement, right? And Jamie, that was kind of your first exposure, it sounds like, to the many attachments inside of the code enforcement department.
Yeah.
So we'll get into that. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Lauren.
I was going to say, we're going to get into that on a future slide. But I think that's where you first got to see the inner workings of document management and how to get some of those documents from code enforcement in there. And then as the final phase 2, community development, so that was basically building and planning, primarily began to implement Cityworks PLL, OnBase plan review, the Timmons Group PLL portal, and then another migration of documents for that group. And that was another part where Jamie played a pretty essential role in migrating those documents into those systems working together seamlessly. So anything I should add or that you want to add here, Jamie?
The only thing that I thought about when you were mentioning business license, I think one of the main reasons we decided to go first with business license is out of everybody that was in TRAKiT, they were the most standalone, if you will.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and other departments have some work with business license. For instance, planning, maybe we'll have to evaluate a new business to make sure that it's appropriate for the location.
Yeah.
So that would give other departments kind of like a toehold into seeing Cityworks, right? Kind of like a stealth way to get them involved in Cityworks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pre-training, yeah.
Yeah, and the other the community development departments obviously work very closely with one another. So I remember, we wanting to get a business license over because they were sort of not completely out on their own, but they had their own workflows that were pretty unique to them.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next slide, because I know we want to get into kind of the actual process, the nuts and bolts of how you executed this. And to some degree, I know we need to discuss a little bit about TRAKiT and your existing system. Can you tell me a little bit? So what was the TRAKiT document management sort of situation? What did that look like?
Yeah, so I found this when we were investigating for a business license initially. So in order to be able to get good data to go along with your document files, you really need to have some kind of metadata there that relates to it. Like we had things like who uploaded the file and a description of the file and those kinds of things. So TRAKiT actually had that metadata stored within tables in the database. So when we were looking through that, we were able to discover kind of like some more information about these documents, and that was useful in the conversion process.
Yeah, all the documents digitized in TRAKiT with the exception of the paper ones we discussed already, right?
Yeah, TRAKiT, well, they had, for instance, code enforcement would have like a lot of images related to their cases. And so they would upload those into TRAKiT as an attachment.
Okay, so users were already used to using TRAKiT as their, location for dropping things like Word documents and reports and photos and things like that.
Right. Yes. Even the email messages, things like that. They would add those all up in there as attachments.
Okay. So, and then on the Cityworks and OnBase side, I don't know if you want to give us a little bit of an overview of, basically how those are set up in relation to, versus what you had in TRAKiT.
Sure. Yeah. So I think the best kind of analogy to what we had in TRAKiT is if you think about the Cityworks attachment system, the base attachment system, where all you do is you say like, I want to attach a file or files, right? And they get uploaded and they're stored on disk somewhere.
Yeah.
So the difference we had with the OnBase, once we started delving into it, is that when you upload the document, it actually becomes a document within a management system. So it has keywords associated with it. It has indexes on it. It can be searched. And so there's more capabilities on the back end when you do it that way.
Right. You're kind of like uploading to the cloud, sort of, right?
Yeah, in a way. I mean, it's really it's putting it into its own management system that's separate from Cityworks. So.
And so when it comes to users moving from a system like TRAKiT, where we have all the documents are really stored specifically in TRAKiT, to Cityworks and OnBase, where those documents are associated with Cityworks, but they're being stored in OnBase document management, which is a much more wide-ranging system in terms of being able to search documents and that sort of thing. How did users, handle that switch in terms of, I know you mentioned that users view document handling and management as a system. Was that a little bit of a transition for you guys?
Yeah, it was important. It was important for us to ensure the user experience was pretty straightforward. Right. We didn't want a situation where users had to launch a separate client manually and then go in and run a search, right, to find the files or to attach the files. So having the Cityworks, the license OnBase's integration point with the Cityworks Office UI, those XML customizations will actually put a button there on the case that they can click on to attach a file or to retrieve files.
Right.
And that process then passes through some of the keywords that relate to the case. So the users don't have to do a manual lookup or a manual import. So that was important. So users really, they still view it. They almost don't see the distinction, right? They click the button and that's their attachment system. They don't even necessarily realize that they're launching OnBase's Unity client to do the work. Yeah,
to them, they're still in Cityworks, right?
Right. It's all part of the same system. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's all kind of seamless working together. So I know the effort, obviously, to actually move the documentation was quite a bit. So I want to get into that. If we just kind of move from the background to the actual discovery that you did in order to get some of this data over. So it sounds like you already had some familiarity with what the attachment setup kind of looked like already in TRAKiT, right?
Yeah, I had investigated that in the past. If people had issues with the attachments in TRAKiT, so I went in and I figured out kind of how they were storing the metadata related to the documents, and then where the documents themselves were on disk, so that we could troubleshoot that piece. So I knew about that, and we actually I was called upon to provide some of that information. We had a Hyland implementation partner that worked with us on the business license portion.
For phase one.
And she had asked for some information like metadata related to, or what metadata we had related to files. Right. And I gave her a list of that, and then based on that, she was able to set up some keywords and things for business license.
Okay, cool. So in terms of the document types that, a lot of the items that we have on screen here, in terms of getting the documents into OnBase, a lot of these items where it sounds like they were defined in phase 1, right, by the Hyland business partner. But for phase 1.5, as we're calling it, in phase 2, those were items that you came up with yourself, right? Or discovered yourself?
Yeah, we, looking at what we did for business license, I determined that we wanted to streamline things a bit. So we did set up separate keyword types and all the related information document types to streamline it more for code enforcement and for community development. So I did go through and I set all those pieces up myself and got everything going for that.
Okay, great. So I know, and then the screenshot here in terms of, so this is the document import processor here on the right? Right, yeah, and that's the tool within OnBase that kind of tied the whole process together. So the document import processor, you feed it a file that describes the documents and their metadata and where the files are located, and then it will import the document and then associate the appropriate keywords into the metadata in OnBase. So the key thing to see here, I think, is that if you look on the forwardmost window there, the field configuration. So that list of keywords, those are the keywords that are related to the document type that we were importing. And the ones you see there and in that order is how we have to fill out the file that then is used to process the document import processor. Gotcha. Okay. And so then all the documents they're related to that Cityworks case number, or that Cityworks case, right? Primarily.
Yeah, you can see that keyword right there. The second one is Cityworks case number. So
right.
That ensures that every document that's attached through Cityworks, it has the case number attached with it. So it's easy to look at.
Gotcha. So Cityworks users basically use the Cityworks software and the case ID number kind of as that central point, right? And then they launch into OnBase when they click on the button, and it has all this other indexed information about whatever document was brought over from TRAKiT, right?
Yes. Yep. That's it. Exactly.
Cool. All right. Well, now that we have a kind of good idea of what you had to, acquire and learn about how to get those documents into Cityworks and OnBase, let's talk a little bit about kind of the execution of doing so. And I know there's a little bit more here than I could probably speak of. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about kind of building the SQL statement with the data for the import process.
Sure. So like I was saying on the last slide, so the list of the keywords is what we needed to fill then from TRAKiT itself. So if you see there, the selection, we're basically building up a pipe delimited list of, for every attachment that's in TRAKiT, it's got all of the pieces of data that will become keywords in OnBase. So the permit, the path name at the top, the permit number, and on down from there. I think one of the ones that I wanted to call out especially was the file extension.
Right.
The file extension determines the and I want to say what this is. It's the file type of the document, not the document type, but the file type.
Right.
That's important because in OnBase, in the Unity client, when you're looking up a file and you click on it to preview it, it needs to know what type of file it is to render it properly in the viewer.
Right.
So I needed to do analysis on the paths that were stored in there to pull out those extensions and then figure out from that what type of document it was for OnBase. And that's those numbers there. Each of those corresponds to a particular file type.
Right. So this was the matching or the mapping basically of those file types. So when we're talking file types, we're talking like a PDF or a Word document or a JPEG image, something like that. Right.
Yeah, we had everything from images to Word docs to PDFs to even like mail messages that were in there, and OnBase recognizes those natively and it displays them really nicely. So as long as you have that mapped correctly, then your experience within OnBase will be great for the attachments.
Okay. And how does that change, or how is that different from document types specifically within like OnBase, for example?
Yeah. So the document type is really within OnBase. That is like a higher category that's more related to the content rather than the format of the document.
Right.
And yeah, so that's the main differentiator to me. that was something we needed to learn early on, is like the difference between those two.
Yeah, and I know you later on in phases like 1.5 and phase 2, we kind of trimmed down. You decided to streamline the document types, for the records coming from community development and code enforcement as opposed to the initial run, right? So
yeah,
we'll talk about that a little bit on the next slide, maybe in the lessons learned. But how long did it take to actually run these scripts for, we have the number of records here on the slide.
Yeah, it was, I think, the longest one was the code enforcement. They had the most because of all of their file attachments. They had a lot of images and things. And I think it took around 20 hours, if I remember right, code enforcement. Wow. It was kind of I would run it with, for the testing, I'd run it with a small subset of them just to make sure that everything was correct. And then when we launched the whole thing, I think it was mostly an all-day process. Just let it run overnight and load them all up.
Were there any like errors or things that came up during the process of actually running these scripts and transferring the data that that you became familiar with at the city that might be helpful to other agencies looking to do something like this?
Yeah, one thing I discovered, and it can happen anytime that you have two separate sets of information. So we had the one set of information, which was the actual files on the disk, and then we had a separate set, which was the metadata in the database. Mm-hmm. And so what I found was that at some point in the past, we had lost, I think, some of our attachments from disk somehow. Mm-hmm. Maybe somebody had not copied them over when they thought that they had, or something had happened, probably before my time. But I had to determine like which files on disk were missing actually, and pull those out from the files so that we didn't get a bunch of errors during the run. Right.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. I can only imagine. I know a lot of cities likely are going to have some like data cleanup or potential corruption or errors in their existing data. So it is helpful to know how you work around some of those. Was there any cleanup that you guys did before you started running the scripts, or was everything pretty square in the TRAKiT database to begin with?
Everything was actually pretty good. There weren't very many. I think we did find a few files that had some corruption in them, but for the most part, things were pretty well organized in there.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. Yeah. Really just waiting the 20 hours then.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. Well, and with that, I mean, once you went ahead and transferred that data, right? And users, meanwhile, the project is going on. We have end users, testing out some of the data in Cityworks and testing out some of the new workflows that Timmons Group had worked with city users to, implement as part of our project. You had some of those users test that information out. I mean, was there, what were kind of some of the things that you learned as a result of, of this process and getting some of those documents in there?
I think the main thing we kind of touched on a little bit earlier was after the business license implementation, we didn't know anything about the process obviously going in. So we relied on our implementation vendor to really bring that in. And that was not Timmons Group, I'll just be clear. Mm-hmm. And so when they set that up, they worked directly with the business license group to determine what types of documents do you guys need to recover, right? Mm-hmm. You need to request from the applicants.
Sure.
And so they got a list, and I think there were 20 or 25 of them that were there. And so they set up a separate document type in OnBase for each of those. Mm-hmm. And that is like overkill really for what we had. So we mentioned earlier about how the users kind of see this as a unified system.
Right.
So they don't necessarily want to think about, like, I'm doing a Cityworks attachment. I don't want to think about like hitting a drop down and determining what type of document is it that I'm uploading and all that. So
right.
What we found is that a lot of times people would go to attach a document and they wouldn't change that, right? Because they don't really recognize that they're supposed to. I mean, we tried to train them on it, but it's hard.
Yeah. So when when we say they weren't choosing a document type, so for example, if I have a picture of a driver's license or something like that I need to submit as part of an application for a business license, I wasn't going into your legacy system and indicating that I'm uploading a driver's license.
Yeah, in TRAKiT, they didn't have that concept, right? It was just, all it was a file that was being
right. There's no document types in TRAKiT, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that it sounds like then streamlining the number of document types was actually probably a good thing. That users
absolutely.
have those designations to have to deal with every time they add a document.
Yeah, and the driving factor for that, really, for the document types, what I found is that the retention rules for our city clerk's office, that really is the thing that should drive it, because that's how retention is done in OnBase, is by the document type. So for instance, in our code enforcement, there's two types of attachments, because they have two types of cases that they run. One is a regular code case, and one is for mobile home park code case.
Mm-hmm.
And those are treated differently by the city clerk's office. So we wanted to segregate those, but it was still a one-to-one relationship, because if they have a case type that's mobile home, then the button to launch OnBase will automatically pass through that it's a mobile home attachment.
Oh, okay.
And for code enforcement, it's code enforcement attachment. So having that one-to-one relationship has really worked out well for them.
So the case types are really best associated with document types, as opposed to, the different various things you might take in for an application, for example.
Yeah, I think so. That's been our experience.
Okay, so really the case types are how you determined which document types to use, it sounds like.
Yeah, basically. Well, and that in combination with City Clerk, again, with their file type management they had.
Right. So in terms of, a little bit earlier, you kind of talked about, potentially, expanding on the benefits of having these documents now associated with these permits and licenses and things like that in Cityworks, having those documents in OnBase. So have you guys already experienced any kind of key benefits from having those documents associated with Cityworks in OnBase, or is that something that you envision kind of coming further on down the line?
I think we're still in the process of building it out. We have a lot of plans for OnBase and for expansion. It's all limited by budget, as I'm sure everybody can relate on that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, ultimately, our vision is that we'll have most, if not all, city employees will be working in OnBase.
Okay.
And once we're to that level, then having all of our documents in that central location is going to be really valuable. If you think about things like a public records request, right? Being able to just search keywords within the database rather than trying to hunt through who knows how many shared drives, right, to find the files. So really, it's still a little bit in our imagination going forward, the benefits, but I know they're there. We're going to get there.
Right, and implementing Cityworks with this component of OnBase is a key piece of getting all those shared drives eventually connected, right, and into one place.
Yeah, making everything all work together. So the Cityworks attachment with that, the OnBase planner view, all of that stuff, all the documents living there, and it's all, again, as you said, it's a system for them.
Sure, yeah. Is there, if you could go back and do anything differently, would you change anything that you kind of undertook as part of the process of migrating these documents?
I think if we could go back and redo business license, I would have done that. Fewer documents, for sure.
Now that you know everything that you didn't know then.
Yeah, exactly. Just to not, it's not all puppies and rainbows, right? So just the fact that right now, at least, we're kind of limited to office mode just because of the way that Cityworks and OnBase integrate is a little bit difficult. I know Cityworks is working on, Cityworks and OnBase both, or Hyland both, are working on getting that working for Respond, and hopefully that'll be here soon. But it's still, it's a little bit frustrating. We're ready to move to Respond, so we just need to be patient, because we definitely need that capability.
Yeah, absolutely. We're looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Well, I think that was the last kind of section. I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to add for lessons learned.
I think that was all that I had.
Okay, good. Well, I appreciate you joining me to allow users a little bit of a look into how migrating like digital attachments, which we're seeing more and more cities interested in doing moving forward. Obviously, not everyone has the wealth of clean digital records that Escondido has in their legacy had in their legacy system. We're still seeing paper at different organizations, but this is a question that at Timmons Group we've been getting a lot more questions about. A lot more folks interested or curious as to how we might accomplish this, if they were to move to Cityworks for PLL, for example. So I think I just pulled up the slide with kind of our information in it. If anyone wants to contact us or reach out to Jamie or I think absolutely welcome. Jamie, is there anything else that you want to add?
No, I don't think so. It's good to see you again, Lauren, and I appreciate the opportunity to kind of share our experience with how we did this, and hopefully it'll be helpful to some other organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you hopping on the phone to talk about it with me and share the technical expertise, at least the parts that I understood. Anyway. All right. Well, I'll let you go. Thanks everybody for joining, and we'll end it here.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.